December 7, 1941, 7:48 a.m. The morning sun climbs over Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, casting long shadows across Battleship Row. In the cockpit of a Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter, Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya leads the first Wave 183. Aircraft screaming out of the dawn sky like mechanical hawks. Below, the American Pacific Fleet lies anchored, vulnerable, exposed. Within minutes, torpedoes tear into battleship hulls, bombs punch through armored decks. Black smoke billows in columns so thick they blot out the sun. The surprise is total. The devastation is absolute. Japanese pilots circle above the carnage, their radios crackling with exhilaration. They have trained for this moment for months, perfected their dive angles, memorized their targets, honed their tactics to surgical precision. As they bank toward the rendezvous point, many believe they are witnessing the death of American naval power in the Pacific. What they do not yet understand, what they cannot possibly imagine as they climb back toward their carriers, is that they have awakened something far more dangerous than a sleeping giant. They have ignited an industrial furnace that will forge a generation of airmen unlike any the world has ever seen. U.S. Navy Action Report, December 7, 1941. 4 months later, April 18, 1942, 16 B-25, Mitchell bombers lumber off the pitching deck of the USS Hornet, 650 nautical miles from Tokyo. It should be impossible. Land-based medium bombers launching from a carrier deck, a feat never attempted in combat. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle leads them into the western sky, each aircraft straining under maximum fuel loads, flying at wave-top height to avoid detection. They reach the Japanese home islands. They drop their bombs on Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya. The physical damage is minimal. The psychological impact is seismic. For the Japanese High Command, the realization strikes like a sledgehammer. The Americans are willing to attempt the impossible. They are audacious. They are unpredictable. They are coming. Doolittle Raid, After Action Report, April 1942, June 4, 1942. Dawn breaks over Midway Atoll. Vice Admiral Kiichi Nagumo commands the Kido Butte, the most powerful carrier strike force ever assembled for fleet carriers. 248 aircraft, the same iron fist that hammered Pearl Harbor. His pilots are veterans, many with over 1,000 flight hours, their skill forged in the skies over China. In the South Pacific, they expect another victory. What they encounter instead defies their understanding of American capability. Wave after wave of U.S. Navy torpedo bombers press home attacks with suicidal determination. They fly obsolete Douglas, TBD, devastators, slow, underarmed, flying coffins straight into walls of anti-aircraft fire. Torpedo Squadron 8 from the USS Hornet is annihilated completely. Of 15 aircraft, only one pilot survives. The Japanese pilots watch in confused horror. Why do the Americans keep coming? Why do they throw themselves into certain death without hesitation? The answer arrives at 10:22 a.m. when 37 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown drop out of the sun at 70-degree angles, their bombs slamming into the decks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu while their aircraft are refueling and rearming. Within 6 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers are burning wrecks. By day's end, for carriers the heart of Japanese naval air power rests on the ocean floor. Nagumo's surviving pilots return to their remaining ships in shock, their voices hollow over the radio frequencies. How had the Americans found them? How had they coordinated such a devastating strike? The Zeros had shot down dozens of attackers, yet somehow the Americans had still broken through. Battle of Midway Action Reports, June 4 to 7, 1942. The year is 1942. The Pacific War has exploded across a theater spanning 64 million square miles of ocean, jungle, and coral islands. The Japanese combined fleet operates under the shadow of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, a brilliant strategist who studied at Harvard and understands American industrial might better than his colleagues, yet even he believes that Japanese spiritual discipline, warrior tradition, and tactical supremacy will prevail in the crucial first year of conflict. The Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service fields the finest carrier pilots in the world, each averaging 700 to 800 flight hours before entering combat. Their Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters are technological marvels, lighter, faster climbing, more maneuverable than any Allied fighter in the Pacific theater in early 1942. Japanese doctrine emphasizes offensive spirit, aggressive tactics, and Bushido, the samurai code demanding courage unto death. On paper, American naval aviation appears outmatched. The United States begins the war with approximately 5,260 naval aviators. Their primary carrier, fighter, the F4F Wildcat, is heavier, slower, and climbs poorly compared to the Zero. Early war losses are catastrophic. At Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Pacific Fleet loses 188 aircraft destroyed on the ground. In the opening months of 1942, Japanese forces sweep across the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, Wake Island, Guam. American pilots fight with desperate courage, but are overwhelmed by numbers, experience, and technology. U.S. Naval Aviation Training Report, 1941 to 1942. Yet beneath the surface of these early defeats, something unprecedented is taking shape across the continental United States. In Pensacola, Florida, in Corpus Christi, Texas, in Jacksonville, Florida, and at dozens of auxiliary fields scattered across the American South and Midwest, a transformation is underway. The U.S. Navy flight training program is expanding at a rate that defies comprehension. Before Pearl Harbor, the Navy graduated approximately 600 pilots per year. By 1943, that number explodes to over 20,000 annually. Tens of thousands of young men, farm boys from Iowa, mechanics from Detroit, college students from California flood into training pipelines that will reshape them into naval aviators. What the Japanese do not understand, what their intelligence services fail to grasp, is that American pilot training is not merely expanding, it is being revolutionized. While Japanese pilots continued to receive intensive but limited training focused on offensive tactics and individual skill, American flight schools are implementing a standardized, systematic, and scalable training methodology that will produce not just skilled pilots, but thousands of them, each trained to a baseline competency that Japanese veterans will find impossible to believe. The infrastructure behind this transformation is staggering. New airfields carved from swamps and prairies, tens of thousands of training aircraft rolling off assembly lines, flight simulators, gunnery ranges, navigation courses, and instrument training, all coordinated by the Bureau of Aeronautics under Rear Admiral John Dowes and delivered by flight instructors who themselves are being mass-produced. Bureau of Aeronautics Training Expansion Report, 1942 to 1943. But the Japanese pilots circling over Midway's burning carriers do not yet understand what is coming. They do not comprehend the scale of the industrial colossus they have provoked. They do not realize that the pilots they face today, brave but often inexperienced, will soon be replaced by aviators who have logged 300 flight hours before seeing combat, who have fired thousands of rounds on gunnery ranges, who have practiced coordinated tactics until they function like clockwork, and who will keep coming in numbers that will darken the Pacific skies in the cockpits of their Zeros, returning to their remaining carriers in the fading light of June 4, 1942. The surviving Japanese pilots know only one thing with terrible certainty. The Americans they encountered today fought with a ferocity and determination that no amount of skill or tradition could overcome. And somewhere across that vast ocean, more are being forged every single day. The secret lies not in a single aircraft, not in one tactical innovation, but in something far more profound, a training revolution that transforms raw recruits into combat-ready aviators at industrial scale. While Japanese pilot training remains rooted in pre-war methods, intensive, individualized, and impossible to expand rapidly, the United States implements a standardized pipeline that treats pilot production like manufacturing fighter planes. At Pensacola Naval Air Station, the Navy's primary training facility since 1914, the transformation is visible in every direction. Hangars multiply across the Florida coastline, runways extend into former. By 1943, the facility processes over 1,100 student pilots simultaneously, cycling them through a curriculum designed by Commander Luis de Flores, an inventor and training innovator who applies industrial engineering principles to human skill development. De Flores introduces synthetic training devices, link trainers, gunnery recognition trainers that allow students to practice emergency procedures, instrument flying, and target tracking without burning precious flight hours or risking aircraft The philosophy is revolutionary: break complex skills into components, drill each component to proficiency, then integrate them systematically. Training Division, Bureau of Aeronautics, Standardized Curriculum Report, 1943. The numbers tell the story. A U.S. Navy pilot entering combat in late 1943 has logged approximately 300 flight hours, including 150 hours in operational aircraft like the F6F Hellcat or F4U Corsair. He has fired over 2,000 rounds in aerial gunnery practice, achieving minimum qualification scores on towed sleeve targets. He has completed night flying training, instrument flying under the hood, formation flying in 4-plane divisions, and simulated carrier landings on shore fields before ever approaching a carrier deck. By contrast, Japanese pilot training, already intensive before the war begins, to collapse under attrition. After Midway, the Japanese lose, not just for carriers, but 110 veteran pilots, including irreplaceable squadron leaders and instructors. The Japanese training system cannot scale to replace these losses. Pre-war training programs required 18 to 24 months to produce a carrier-qualified pilot. As losses mount through 1942 and 1943, training timelines are compressed. By 1944, Japanese replacement pilots arrive at frontline units with as few as 100 flight hours, barely enough to handle their aircraft in combat conditions, let alone survive against American pilots with triple that experience. One Japanese ace, Saburo Sakai, records his shock upon meeting replacement pilots in late 1943. They could barely fly in formation. Many had never fired their guns at a moving target. I knew they would not survive their first engagement. Dramatized composite from Sakai's post-war memoir, Saburo Sakai Samurai, 1957. The American advantage extends beyond flight hours into tactical doctrine itself. Beginning in early 1943, the U.S. Navy systematically analyzes combat reports from Coral Sea, Midway, and the Guadalcanal campaign. Lieutenant Commander John Thatcher's Thatchweave, a defensive scissors maneuver that negates the Zero's superior maneuverability, becomes standard training for all fighter pilots. The doctrine is simple. American pilots do not dogfight Zeros in turning engagements where the Japanese aircraft excels. Instead, they exploit the superior speed and diving characteristics of newer American fighters like the F6F Hellcat, developed by Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation and entering service in January 1943. The Hellcat is purpose-built to kill Zeros. It weighs 12,740 pounds fully loaded versus the Zero's 6,025 pounds. It carries 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns with 400 rounds per gun, 2,400 rounds of devastating firepower compared to the Zero's to 20mm cannons and to 7.7mm machine guns with limited ammunition. The Hellcat's Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine generates 2,000 horsepower, pushing the aircraft to 380 miles per hour in level flight and enabling dive speeds that the lighter Zero cannot match without risking structural failure. American pilots are trained to use boom and zoom tactics, dive from altitude, fire a high-speed pass, then climb away using superior power before the Zero can maneuver into position. The Japanese called these tactics cowardly, dishonorably refusal to fight properly. What they failed to understand is that American pilots are trained to win, not to display courage. F6F Hellcat Pilot's Handbook, Navy Department, 1943, October 24, 1944. Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, unfolds across the Philippine Sea. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commands the Japanese Northern Force, a decoy fleet built around 4 carriers, Zuikaku, Zuiho, Kitos, and Chiyoda. His mission is desperate: lure Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet away from the invasion beaches, sacrificing his carriers so that Japanese battleships can slip through and destroy the American amphibious forces. Ozawa's carriers launch 116 aircraft on the morning of October 24th. They are intercepted by Hellcats from Task Force 38 before reaching their targets. The engagement is not a battle, it is a massacre. American pilots employ coordinated division tactics drilled into them through hundreds of training hours. They attack in waves, 4-plane divisions covering each other, executing textbook boom and zoom attacks. Radio discipline is immaculate. Squadron leaders direct their pilots with calm precision despite the chaos of combat. The Japanese formations disintegrate. Zeros scatter, attempting individual dogfights where their maneuverability might provide advantage. It makes no difference. The Hellcats simply refuse to engage in turning fights, instead maintaining speed and altitude advantage, diving through the Japanese formations again and again. Of the 116 Japanese aircraft launched, only 29 returned to their carriers. American losses, 18 aircraft. The kill ratio is over 6-1. Japanese pilots who survive report encounters with enemy aviators who fight with mechanical precision, who never break formation discipline, who seem to execute coordinated tactics as if reading from a script. A captured Japanese flight leader, interrogated aboard USS New Jersey, struggles to explain. They moved like machines. Every attack was identical. We could not predict individual action because there was no individual action only. Group maneuvers we had never seen. Dramatized composite battle of Leyte Gulf action reports. October 23 to 26, 1944. The technical specifications tell only part of the story. Behind every Hellcat, behind every coordinated strike, stands an invisible army of engineers, mechanics, and technicians who ensure American pilots never face the material shortages plaguing their Japanese counterparts. Grumman's Bethpage, New York factory produces 12,275 F6F Hellcats between 1942 and 1945, an average of 341 aircraft per month at peak production. Each Hellcat receives rigorous quality control inspection before delivery. Spare parts flow through logistics pipelines that stretch from California to forward bases in the Marshall Islands. American carrier mechanics can swap out an R2800 engine in under 4 hours using standardized tools and procedures, documented in technical manuals written by Pratt & Whitney engineers. Japanese mechanics, by contrast, work with dwindling supplies, improvised parts, and aircraft that accumulate mechanical problems they lack resources to fix properly. By 1944, Japanese carrier aircraft availability rates fall below 60%, meaning that nearly half the aircraft nominally assigned to a carrier cannot fly due to maintenance issues. American carriers maintain availability rates above 90%. This is not luck. This is industrial warfare, the systematic application of manufacturing efficiency, logistics management, and engineering standardization to the problem of maintaining combat power. Bureau of Aeronautics Logistics and Maintenance Report, 1944. November 11, 1944, the USS Hornet launches strikes against Japanese positions in the Philippines. Among the pilots is Ensign Robert Burnell, 3 months out of training, 320 flight hours in his logbook. He flies at dawn combat air patrol, encounters for Zeros attempting to attack the task force, shoots down 2 in his first combat engagement, and returns to the carrier without damage to his aircraft. In his after-action report, he writes with almost casual precision about airspeed, altitude, deflection angles, and ammunition expenditure. There is no bravado, no dramatic narrative, only technical competence applied to lethal purpose. Across the Pacific, thousands of pilots like Bernal are writing similar reports. The Japanese pilots facing them, those who survive, recognize something terrifying. The Americans are no longer learning on the job. They arrive at the front already trained to a standard that exceeds most Japanese veterans, and behind them, the training pipeline continues to flow, an endless river of replacements that Japan cannot match, cannot counter, and ultimately cannot survive. The strategic impact of America's pilot production advantage reverberates across every major campaign from 1943 onward, reshaping not merely tactical engagements but the fundamental calculus of naval air warfare in the Pacific. By mid-1943, Japanese commanders face an impossible mathematics problem. Their frontline squadrons bleed experienced pilots faster than the training pipeline can replace them. While American task forces grow stronger with each passing month, their air groups filled with pilots whose competency would have been considered exceptional by pre-war standards, but who now represent merely the baseline, the minimum acceptable output of an industrial training system operating at full capacity. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commanding Task Force 58, launches strikes against the Marianas in June 1944, with 956 aircraft spread across 15 carriers. His air groups include pilots with an average of 525 flight hours, men who have practiced carrier landings until the procedure becomes muscle memory, who can navigate by instruments through tropical storms, who understand radio discipline so thoroughly that they coordinate 100-plane strikes with less chatter than a Japanese 4-plane division. The Japanese defenders at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey, shoot by American pilots face this juggernaut with approximately 430 aircraft flown by pilots, averaging fewer than 200 flight hours. The outcome is predetermined by training differentials before the first shot is fired. Task Force 58 Action Report. Battle of Philippine Sea, June 19th to 20th, 1944. The psychological impact on Japanese aircrews becomes a factor as significant as any technical advantage. Combat reports from late 1944 and early 1945, captured after the war and analyzed by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, reveal a progressive collapse of Japanese pilot morale as they confront an enemy that never stops coming, never runs out of aircraft, and never seems to field incompetent pilots anymore. One report from the carrier Zuikaku, dated October 1944, notes that replacement pilots are openly expressing doubt about survival before their first missions. Squadron leaders describe an atmosphere of fatalism, a resignation to death that differs fundamentally from the offensive warrior spirit that characterized Japanese naval aviation in 1941 and 1942. The Americans, by contrast, exhibit confidence bordering on routine professionalism. Post-war interviews with U.S. Navy pilots reveal a common attitude. They expected to survive because they trusted their training, their aircraft, and their wingmen. Lieutenant Alex Fratu, a Hellcat ace credited with 19 kills, describes his mindset in a 1945 interview. "I never thought I'd get shot down. We'd practiced everything so many times that combat felt like another training exercise, except the targets shot back. But we knew what to do. We always knew what to do." This psychological differential, Japanese fatalism versus American confidence grounded in systematic preparation, becomes as decisive as any technical specification. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. Interrogations of Japanese officials, 1946. The human cost of Japan's training collapse manifests most starkly in the Kamikaze campaign, which begins in October 1944 and represents an implicit admission that Japan can no longer compete in conventional naval air combat. Vice Admiral Tokujiro Onishi organizes the first special attack units, not because Japanese culture glorifies suicide, but because Japanese pilot training has deteriorated to the point where conventionally trained pilots cannot reliably hit maneuvering ships. A kamikaze pilot requires only basic flight proficiency, enough skill to take off, fly to the target area, and crash into a ship. No advanced gunnery training, no combat maneuvering, no navigation beyond rudimentary skills. From October 1944 through August 1945, approximately 3,800 Japanese pilots fly kamikaze missions. They sink 47 Allied ships and damage 368 more. But the exchange ratio remains brutally unfavorable. Nearly 80 pilots lost for every ship sunk. American combat air patrols, radar picket ships, and proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells developed by engineers at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory and manufactured by companies like Eastman Kodak shred kamikaze formations. Before they reach the carriers, the few attackers who break through face American damage control teams trained to save ships that Japanese commanders would consider lost. The carrier USS Franklin, hit by 2 bombs on March 19, 1945, suffers 724 crew killed and remains dead in the water, burning. Her flight deck wrecked, yet damage control teams keep her afloat, and she returns to the United States under her own power. Japanese carriers hit by equivalent damage typically sink within hours. The differential is not courage. Both sides display that in abundance, but training, systems engineering, and the unglamorous work of damage control instructors at shore facilities like Naval Training Station Great Lakes, Illinois. Kamikaze Campaign Statistics, U.S. Naval Historical Center, 1946. Behind the front, the engineers and technicians who sustain American air superiority receive little recognition, but prove as essential as the pilots themselves. At forward bases like Ulithi Atoll, mobile logistics units serviced hundreds of aircraft daily, replacing engines, repairing battle damage, and maintaining combat readiness at rates that Japanese forces abandoned as impossible by 1944. Aviation machinists made work 18-hour shifts in tropical heat, following procedures documented in technical manuals written by civilian engineers at Wright Field. Ohio, and the Naval Air Technical Training Command in Memphis, Tennessee. Aviation ordnancemen trained in 8-week courses at bases like Naval Air Station Jacksonville load bombs, rockets, and ammunition with standardized procedures that ensure reliability under combat stress. These men never fire a shot in anger, yet their contribution is measured in sortie rates that Japanese logistics cannot match. An American carrier in 1945 can launch and recover aircraft, rearm and refuel them, and launch again within 90 minutes. Japanese carriers, starved of spare parts and qualified maintenance personnel, require 3 to 4 hours for equivalent operations, a tempo differential that translates directly into combat power. The engineers at companies like Grumman, Pratt & Whitney, and Douglas Aircraft design not merely aircraft, but entire ecosystems of maintenance, supply, and operational sustainability. Their legacy is not celebrated in combat narratives, but it is written in every mission flown, every landing recovered, every pilot brought home safely. Bureau of Aeronautics, Logistics, Support Systems, Analysis, 1945. The advantage built through systematic training and industrial integration flows forward into post-war American military doctrine. The lessons of Pacific Naval Aviation: standardized training pipelines, scalable skill development, integration of simulators and synthetic training, emphasis on coordinated tactics over individual heroism, become foundational principles for Cold War military aviation. The U.S. Navy's Fighter Weapons School, established in 1969 and popularly known as Top Gun, directly descends from the training revolution begun in 1942. The school's methodology: standardized curriculum, measurable performance criteria, systematic analysis of combat tactics mirrors the principles implemented by Commander Luis de Flores and the Bureau of Aeronautics during World War II. Modern U.S. military pilot training, requiring over 200 flight hours before combat assignment, reflects the same industrial approach to skill development that shocked Japanese pilots in 1944. Even in the 21st century, American military aviation maintains the philosophical commitment to overwhelming training superiority that proved decisive in the Pacific. Produce pilots in numbers, train them to consistent high standards, equip them with superior technology, and support them with logistics systems that never fail. The Gulf War air campaign of 1991, with its near-total coalition air superiority, demonstrates the enduring validity of principles established over the Pacific Ocean 50 years. Earlier U.S. Navy Fighter Weapons School, Historical Analysis, 1996, February 25, 1945. The USS Saratoga operates off Iwo Jima, launching strikes against Japanese positions defending the island. At 16:57 hours, 6 kamikaze aircraft break through the combat air patrol and strike the carrier in rapid succession. Bombs explode on the flight deck. Fires rage through hangar spaces. 123 men die. The ship lists 7 degrees, yet within 30 minutes, damage control parties contain the fires. Within 2 hours, the flight deck is cleared for emergency landings. Saratoga withdraws from the combat zone but remains afloat, ultimately steaming to Puget Sound Navy Yard for repairs. Aboard the burning carrier, as firefighters battle flames and medical corpsmen treat the wounded, a young pilot from Fighting Squadron 12 stands on the shattered deck, watching smoke rise into the twilight sky. He has been in combat for 3 months. He has flown 47 missions. He has trained for this moment since the day he reported to Pensacola Naval Air Station 2 years earlier. He knows that tomorrow, if the carrier remains operational, he will fly again. He knows that back in the United States, thousands more pilots are moving through the same training pipeline that forged him, an endless stream of replacements that the enemy cannot match and cannot stop. In his flight suit pocket, he carries a worn checklist from flight training engines, start procedures, takeoff minimums, emergency protocols, the mundane tools of systematic preparation that transformed American boys into the most lethal naval aviators the world had ever seen. Admir.